Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. And today we're gonna actually get into another, I guess you would say another question to the channel. It was a discussion that was being had amongst a few friends of mine and whatnot, some people I know in regards to for women, available guys of interest, and what would be considered like the guys that is available to them for their selection and what would be the right choice. And I was going to actually do this more as a video of just kind of saying like this certain type of guy versus this certain type of guy. But instead, I'm just going to actually lay it out as not so much verses, but so much as presenting what these guys are, how they are, and then letting a person kind of really just say like, okay, who does this work for, or how does this work for? Just providing that knowledge for how this goes. So essentially, in answering to that question, or at least coming into the discussion, was the difference between the actual percentage of available guys of interest that are positive, or as I kind of wrote down, minus the alpha red flags from the good alphas. And in this term, I'm using alphas just in a sense as leaders. I'm not trying to use it in the sense of the way that it might be used, in terms of, the way people use it today, maybe in a kind of toxic way or whatever the case is. I'm just using it in the form of like a leader personality, not necessarily that you are a leader, but a leader personality, or someone who kind of owns their life. They really are that person who owns their life. They really, they're not a follower. They're owning their life. They're giving structure to their life, and they know their plan of life, or at least like they're not following behind anyone. So it's a general kind of way of just using it as a placeholder for that. And we kind of jump into how age plays into this, because you have alphas at 20. And when I use that, I'm just making the broad spectrum of just saying at a young age. Alphas at 20 versus alphas at 40. And the alphas at 40 really divide into the ones who have not been alphas since they got 40. Like they had to build themselves up to become that. And then alphas that around the, I'm saying 40 is like age range, versus the alphas who were like that since they were young and built themselves up to, who not built themselves up, I'm sorry, who just aged and they had it since they were young. So essentially what you have is, we're looking at guys inside their 20s or around about that age. The dynamic of the guys who are in their 40s, who were always alphas, in the sense like that, kind of go-getter type of person who always had like women around them since young age, and they are now 40 years old. And then also the guy who didn't have women around his age, but he's also now 40 years old, but he had to build himself up to become an alpha. So that dynamic. And the reason why I'm presenting, the young ones as well into the picture, because I feel like nowadays, especially in terms of like, what women are have available for them to target or look at, or of guys of interest, it changes from your age range for the female as well. But generally speaking, a young female has the option of, like, say if it's a young female in her 20s, she has the option of a guy in her 20s, or she has the option of a guy in her 40s. And so understanding the difference between those, since those are options that she has. Obviously, for women who get older, if you are able to attract someone within this range, this detailing the difference between these men will actually also help you with that knowledge as well, if you choose to use it. But obviously, as you get older, your options will diminish. That's just part of life. And I've mentioned stuff like that in previous videos, so I'm not going to really dive heavy into that. But in addition, I also want to make note of that, for any kind of man who is in his upper age, like say 40 and above, and if he's single with no kids, he probably is lacking in some kind of personality traits, or the way he's desired. Because so sometimes people will say, and I'm just throwing this out there, sometimes people will say this, but I'm not trying to say this to aggravate anybody, but sometimes people will say that women, if they're like 35 and up, something's wrong with them because they should have already been snatched up by that time. If you check off the boxes of your personality being great, and you're attractive, if everything's good with you, there's no reason why someone wouldn't have scooped you up by the age of 35. So if you're single and 35, there's probably something wrong with you. My throwing my opinion in there, I agree with that, but at the same time, that's just kind of what's thrown out there. A lot of times there's something, let's just be harsh with it. There's probably something wrong with you because there's no reason why that should be the case. And a lot of people say, I just haven't found the right person, but that's probably the case. Well, the flip side of that for men is, for men, if you're like 35, 40 years old and you haven't had some long-term relationship where you ended up having kids and maybe it didn't work out, but you don't have kids or whatever the case is, the flip side is there's probably something wrong with you too. Now, it's not wrong with you in the sense of, maybe you're a bad person or maybe you start fights to this and that, but it could be wrong with you in the fact that you just aren't very appealing. You don't have that aspect about you in terms of the gift of gab, and you can build up the aspect about you in terms of money, but maybe you're lacking that charm, that charisma. You haven't learned the people skills that draw people in. And that aspect, just like I said, for the women who's above a certain age and you are single, whatever the case is, the same could apply to men who have never, at least say, I had a shot with kids. Someone desired me so much they wanted to have kids with me. And even if it didn't work out for whatever the reason, at least I know I was that desirable that somebody wanted to have kids with me. But anyway, I'll get back on topic. So generally speaking, a guy who's an alpha at 20, for the women who might be young and they're in their 20s and looking at a guy who's an alpha in their 20s, just giving you just pretty much the rundown of it, not going to rather say whether it's good or bad. That kind of guy is, if he's ultra, charming, charismatic, everyone wants him, whatever the case is, often he's not going to be designed for one woman because he has an abundance. And so though a woman might find that attractive and find the person attractive, which rightfully so, but they have to understand that person is not going to be looking to or appreciate like the value of a woman at that given moment because he has an abundance. He has an abundance of options, and so it would make no sense for him to try to settle down or be a single option to one female. So just throwing out that dynamic, I'm not going to say whether it's good or bad, but if you're actually looking for something serious and you're a young woman in your 20s and you find somebody who's in their 20s and he's checks all the boxes in terms of maybe not in your 20s, you're not really gonna have money, you're not gonna really have resources, but you might be that guy who's the go-getter, the charming guy, whatever the case is. If you're looking for a steady relationship, you're not gonna find that in a 20-year-old alpha. It's just not gonna happen. And for the alpha, it doesn't make any sense for him because he has the world at his fingertips in terms of options of women's. It makes no sense for him to do that. So that's never gonna be the case as far as them looking to settle down or be a single option for one woman. Now, when it comes to guys who get older, and say if a younger woman in her, say, young to mid 20s are considering an older guy as an option, know that there is a difference between the alpha who was always an alpha since he was young and the alpha who became alpha from the ground up. Now, the one who had it since he was young, similar to a person who did not come from money but was built up to appreciate it. They appreciate being humble if you didn't have that, like if you weren't the alpha from being young. But if for a person who was alpha since they're young, it's almost like a spoiled, for lack of a better word, like the way guys encounter women who are like spoiled women. That guy is going to always have had resources. He's never going to have had a reason to be humble or to even say, have to, I guess you could say, appreciate the long-term aspect of things because he always had a bunch of options. So that same kind of guy is gonna pretty much view things in a way like, I have a bunch of options. So as he gets older, a lot of his mentality is going to be based off of that. He's not going to appreciate. So even though he's gotten older, it's a difference between the guy who never had those options. It's almost like not having money and becoming rich. You understand what that's like. So you are going to be more respectful, be more appreciative. Your goal was to become an alpha so you can probably have a family or have a good structured life, not to just do it just because you wanted more reasons to play, even though some guys do. But for the most part, if that was never your core, that's not how you're going to be. Where a guy who, like I said, was an alpha from a young age, had an abundance of women, is like a guy who comes from money and always had money. They're never going to appreciate or be humble about that experience in general, because they're going to say, I have an abundance. So that is definitely the difference between the two when it comes to women who might be considering that as an option. And even if you're an older woman and you happen to come across a guy who's in his 40s who wants to be with, say, a woman in her 40s as well, nowadays, like I said, that seems to not really be the flow of things, because there's a big difference or disparity with the way society is going. I'm not going to dive into that all heavy because it's a whole bunch going on from here to there. But essentially, even then, the same thing would apply. If you see a guy, you know that he was always spoiled from a young time in terms of always having women, he's not going to be the kind of guy who will have appreciation for the long term of the dynamic of things. Whereas the guy who has grown into it will. Later on, I'm going to dive into another video that's going to kind of dive into from the guy's perspective of why he may not want to, from the guy who built himself up, may not want to, stay on the same wavelength that he may have used to be before he was built up, and in terms of his options. And I'll get into that in another video. But pretty much with this, just highlighting that the man who started off slow in the beginning and had to build his confidence, his strength of character, his respect for himself, the lines that he won't let people cross in regards to crossing over on him, and the man that understands being kind as well as treating others the right way, he's gonna exude that, because that's always what he experienced from back then. So as he builds himself up to be an alpha now, he's gonna still carry those traits, because that's gonna be his baseline traits regardless. So when it comes down to it, pretty much, if a woman was to went after a guy, a nice guy, or like say a guy who would later become an alpha after he builds himself up, but we'll find a guy like that from jump, and they would see he would blossom into a strong man down the line that they would want. That it's better just to take that, stay with them in the journey as they grow, and then you would reap the rewards after the fact. If so happened that that wasn't your situation, then if you're just finding a man who's like that now, like later on in life, and you're older, whatever the case is, as far as a female, just be submissive, because you found a good one. You probably aren't going to really find that many of them left. So in that case, just know the difference between the ones who always were alphas since they were young, and the ones who grow to become alphas later. But one key factor that would kind of point that out, so you kind of know, is that usually the guy who had it all when he was young usually is not as successful as the guy who didn't have it all when he was young and was forced to adapt, because that same adaptation goes into their workflow, into their growth, into everything about them. So they don't just stop at the point of, hey, I'm a little bit better now and I can get some women. It continues into, hey, I got to keep growing and be better at everything in life because I'm so used to not having. So just be able to look for that difference. And this was, like I said, just pointing out guys of interest for women and how they would go in about what they're selecting. I guess you could say just a kind of way of just helping out. Part of a topic of discussion that was going on. Just wanted to share with you guys. And I'll catch you guys in the next video.